perfect. How's that working for you? I mean, the guys that are married, their wives are perfect. We know that. It's a struggle. And I think one of the reasons we hear this and then we kind of say, oh well, is that we're thinking of this in terms of ancient Greek philosophy, whether you know it or not. That's really affected our culture pretty strongly. And one of the ideas of the ancient Greeks was that the gods did not have to change in any way. That meant perfect. No change. Okay. Now, Jesus was not Greek, in case you didn't figure that out. Okay? He was not speaking to a Greek philosophical society. He was not speaking to a bunch of Greeks. He said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And he describes what that is in this gospel. You heard it. Now we'll have to go back and unpack this a bit to get all of it. Jesus gave the example of, you heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now he's referring to what's called in Latin the lex talionis, which is the law of the claw, which put a limit on revenge. And before that limit, there was the idea of tribal revenge. That was a kind of law. And we had a lot of that here in Arizona, if you read any state history ever. For example, among different Indian tribes and against the white soldiers and Indians and all this kind of stuff. This went on for a long time. This tribal retaliation law. Example, Apaches come down from the mountains and they raid the Pima farms, let's say down on the Gila River, which, by the way, did have water in it before we built a dam and turned it off, okay? So they come down and raid the farms. Take the corn, let's say. Well, then the Pimas would get together and go back and attack the Apache food supply and burn the village. Well, then the Apaches would come back down and raid the supplies, burn the village, and kill some people. And then the Pimas back up into the mountains. Let's do all that, but let's kill more people. Oh no, we're going to kill more people than they killed, and that's the tribal revenge kind of law. The idea was you had to inflict more punishment on the other than you received. Now, this is in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis. I don't think you read this, I don't know most people do, but it's a little piece called The Song of the Sword by Lamech. Lamech is a descendant of Cain, and he's speaking to his wives. This is tribal retaliation, big time. Listen, chapter 4, the book of Genesis. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my utterance. I have killed a man for wounding me, a boy for bruising me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Boy, I showed them. That was tribal retaliation. Now, the lex talionis comes along and puts a limit on it. This is an improvement. Why? If you kill somebody, then somebody gets killed. Period. Stop. If somebody ruins your barn, then you ruin their barn. Stop. No more, I'll ruin your barn and... No, none of that. Stop. So the law that the people were used to was that. There were limits on retaliation. That was a big improvement. But Jesus, remember, this is part of the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is not just the Beatitudes. It's only a little piece of it. The Sermon on the Mount goes on for 3 chapters in Matthew, not a few verses. And this is part of it. Jesus is on the mountain. That tells you Matthew is saying he's a lawgiver like Moses, because Moses got the law on a mountain. And Jesus was sitting down when he was teaching this. That's a symbol in their culture. This is really important stuff that the teacher is teaching you, because he's seated. So he's seated down on the mountain. He's a lawgiver teaching you really important stuff. People would get that much, but then they would be shocked when he started saying, you've heard it said, but I say. That wasn't the way to do it in the ancient world. In the ancient world, you quoted somebody. Jesus doesn't. He does this on his own authority. I say. And people would think, ooh, you say. You're giving a new law here. The law came from God to Moses, the greatest lawgiver, Who are you? You see the question in their minds when he's talking. Are you related to God somehow? That's what people would be thinking when they're hearing this. You miss it because it's not part of your culture. So try to get into their mindset a little bit and be surprised. He's revealing something. He's not just another great teacher. There are lots of them in world history. No, Jesus is far beyond that. Far beyond that. And he's giving them the new law, which is not the law of the claw. He's telling them, no, I'm telling you to do something different. Do we take it seriously in our world? No. He doesn't really mean that. Why? I hear this all the time. For example, on the news, so-and-so committed a murder, so he got a lethal injection, he was killed. That was justice. That is not the teaching of Christ. It may be what you want, but you better change if you want to follow Christ. This is not his teaching. He's telling you something different. And please don't be ridiculous. This doesn't mean that murderers should run free and kill people. It's nuts. Of course you need prisons. You know, you're going to have that kind of stuff. But listen to the teaching of Christ, really. Yes, he's impractical. Change. Okay. I think we've got it. That the Lord is saying, no, this is not okay. He doesn't say punishment is never right. He doesn't say that. But he does say stop with the law of the claw. Stop it. It's not okay anymore. And he's speaking to us as one divine. We have to do something different. In our own lives, sisters and brothers, how often do we have to do this? Well, things not so serious, but they're there nevertheless. Somebody hurt you 15 years ago, 30 years ago. What does that require? It doesn't mean you have to like them, but it means you have to do something. What? You have to want the best for them. You really have to want the best for them. What about more serious things? Somebody stole a bunch of money from you. You have to want the best for them. Maybe the best is the truth, and they haven't gotten there yet, but you have to want that for them. Why? Because of this thing about perfection. Jesus challenged you and me both to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, and he described what kind of perfection he's talking about. It is not the perfection of Greek philosophy, meaning no change. Your heavenly Father makes the sun rise on the just and the unjust. He makes the rain fall. Well, I wish he would, as a matter of fact. It's awfully dry here. Hello. Okay. He makes the rain fall on the just and the unjust. In other words, God is full of unmerited generosity. It's not about what you do. God is generous even when you don't deserve it. God is generous. You need to be generous even when the other doesn't deserve it. You need to be generous. That's the way God is. That's the perfection. Jesus said it right in that text. He didn't say be perfect. Your heavenly Father doesn't have to change, and he didn't say that. He gave the description of the sun and the rain. Sisters and brothers, we have to make that alive too. That's our call as Christians. If you want to follow some other teacher on this, go ahead. But this is the teaching of Christ. And if you want the lex talionis, then God will give it to you. You'll get what you deserve. I don't want it. No, that's not how our Heavenly Father is. He's full of unmerited generosity. We don't gain the generosity of God. God gives it to us anyway. Even when we're bad and when we're wrong, it's still there. It doesn't mean don't protect yourself. It means be generous, even when the other doesn't deserve it. That's a hard thing to put into practice. But this is a teaching of Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. This is the heart of Matthew's Gospel. This is extremely important work for Christians. Let's take the word of Christ seriously. How will you put it into practice this week? What will you do about it? To be perfect, as your Heavenly Father is perfect, to be a child of God means you have to act like God. These little babies are being brought to us today to become part of this body, this group of people who have come to know through the teaching of Christ what it is to live the Christian life. They're going to bring up these children in the faith so they know something about it as they get older. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people, well, we'll let the kids decide when they get older. Okay, based on nothing. That's the problem. I'll let the kids decide when they're older if they want to study in school. Really? Is that stupid or what? Okay. You have to give them the foundations. You have to lead them somewhere they don't know anything to make the decision on. It's the same with faith. These parents and godparents are here today saying yes to them. Yes, we will teach the kids. Yes, we will bring them up in the faith. And yeah, when they're adults, they're going to decide all kinds of things. But at least it'll be based on something. It's the law of Christ. That's the something. We need that teaching. We need to hear it. And we need to get it from our heads into action. Let's challenge ourselves with that this week. And may God give you the grace to do it.